Hello, hello, hello. This is the next bit of our shamanism presentation. Please forgive me, it's really annoying. I don't have a down cursor on my computer anymore, and it's just every time I try to put these things in order, that's why I have to stop halfway through. It just mangles the order, and it's just like a never-ending Rubik's Cube, basically, because if I move one thing, another thing moves, and so I'm just going to have to go through the way we've got it, and then maybe if we've done some stuff before, I don't even know how it's ended up, because it's just boring. We're going to reconvene. Hopefully by now you've had a chance to listen to the first presentation, and then now that you've also read some of the resources, just especially about the concept of shamanism, people declaring themselves shamans, where we are today, and that's going to bring us into the global shamanic resurgence. I'm going to give a few case studies, some that I referred to a little bit earlier when I was doing session number 1. So this will all work. Screen share. Okay, so onwards and upwards. Can you see this screen? Theoretically, yes. Okay, this is maybe very good. I don't know how we make it bigger because sometimes it seems to disappear it. So just I hope you can see this. So let me see. I'm going to do an experiment. Can you see me? Can I see me? Yay! This is what we wanted. Okay, so in the global shamanic resurgence, we have this new broadening, I would say, of shamanism as a context, rather than the Siberian Mongolian terms, which is where a lot of people would say they're shamans and declare themselves, and some people would say it's people who care about the earth and who feel quite in tune with it, and who feel empathic with it and feel like they go through suffering processes as we see more and more contamination. So certainly there are more and more people who seem to be having, in the absence of knowing what our lineages are because of colonization, people seem to be having awakenings that seem to bring them into some sort of concept that they have a spiritual role in their society, that they have a channel to provide, that they have gifts that they can't ignore. So that's definitely on the up, and I'm sure just for all of you have experienced something like that. So certainly when certain people who call themselves urban shamans, or who maybe haven't researched shamanism to much of a degree, call themselves shamans, or other people shamans, there is something that's going on that a lot of us are tapping into. And as I may have said, because of what westernization and globalization has done, often the hereditary channels with which people used to follow into shamanism, that's kind of gone. So that's why we have white kids holding space with Peruvian shamans and all of this thing, because it's actually one of the slight bittersweet healing points of the trauma on the planet, because a lot of us don't know our ancestry, or don't know what our parents and families did, our ancestors, and a lot of them were persecuted for like hearing spirits or whatever. So yeah, so this is where it gets kind of all mixed up now. So yeah, the second point is the hereditary channels mutate beyond this ancestral lineage, and this pisses off quite a lot of people. Okay, so there are those who realize that there's a healing taking place. There's a lot of entitled white kids just trumping off with them to their jungle context with all their money, and it's a bit upsetting sometimes to lineage holders. So there's definitely a lot of gatekeeping that needs to be done regarding, is a person really holding this role, or are they coming just to appropriate knowledge? And especially because it's not cool to have feathers and bells and wrestles and stuff like that. Shaman chic, weekend shamanism. So this is a really big issue. Cultural appropriation. This is a huge thing. Some of the Native American elders have taken aside some of the festival organizers in the west coast of the States and said, you need to do something with this cultural appropriation of our sacred outfits, our sacred uniforms. You know, all these kids getting their Balinese supermarket Native American headdresses and parading them around it at festivals. This is really upsets quite a lot of spiritual leaders, because they're like, you've taken everything from us, you've taken our land, now you're taking our spiritual clothing, and you're taking it in a drug-induced context with absolutely no reference point to or experience with the lineage. And this is a big thing right now. And as you know, I mentioned Omilei, and several of us are going to be doing a panel on the 4th of November about cultural materialism. So cultural appropriation is definitely a biggie. And the weekend shamanism thing, and that's for me why I'm really grateful for all the teachings I've had and all the places I've gone. But actually, I kind of knew my own lineage and way of working with energy before I went on my big trips to places like the Amazon. I also had studied a lot of anthropology, so I kind of used to go and had spent. Before I even went to the Amazon the first time I went to Brazil, I think twice, I did everything the anthropologist way. I developed relationships with the cultures. I sat around, I didn't do anything apart from help when asked. I was very quiet, I got involved in community projects, and then I went off the beaten track more and more. Then I knew some of the language and kind of knew a little bit about how the cultures worked. And I always did it in an innocuous way. And, you know, I did it kind of most of it, like very much, pretty much all of it, the off the beaten track way, rather than going to lodges with those tourists. I often went on my own, and when I sat with people and just hung out there. And I didn't, you know, go down any one particular track or path to go to a maestro for X amount of years, because it just felt that it's the same as when I did my doctorate in Japanese culture. I said, I'm not even going to bother learning Japanese language in depth. I knew some. I said, they're always going to see me as a foreigner. They're always going to see me as an outsider. The way I need to monitor and work with everything is to observe their culture and observe it, knowing they're observing me as an outsider. There are some cultures where we will get accepted in, but yeah, you know, this is a big thing as we look at decolonization, is all these jolly rich white people bumbling into these territories and thinking that money is going to buy them knowledge. And it's just a bit bullshit, really. And so it's good if we go and meet, you know, try to take things. So that's why I cut and paste some stuff that came through as transmissions, but I don't say I'm from any of those lineages, because I'm not. I was given very clear guidance, which actually kept me safe as well, because when I did go to some places, there was bonkers stuff starting to happen, or I saw some bonkers stuff or experienced some, and luckily I was always just coming in for a while, going. I could see what was going on in the communities, I could see what was happening to white people, and I kind of just kept myself safe. But I also spent time learning the language, so when I went, I wasn't totally us and them, but I made a bit of an effort. And these sorts of things are what really help this. Hello, give me everything you've got. I want to know to be a shaman. It's just bullshit. So yeah. So and it's upsetting people around the world. So it's the same with a lot of esoteric Indian practice and esoteric African practice that's from way before there were even white settlements. You know, Europe even existed as a concept. And then these white people coming in and, you know, appropriating the things and then making their little weekend goddess class, appropriate concepts of deities from other lineages, which they haven't really got any proper foundations in. Similarly, yoga, you know, it's just like not people doing like competitive yoga, rather than really understanding yoga as a whole form with many, many arms. It's a whole lifestyle. It's a path we walk, you know. So it's this cultural appropriation thing that's big in shamanism right now. Okay, and then, you know, I know this was an earlier slide, but I just wanted to bring it back in the new context of today's little mini class. And then that brings with it this need for gatekeeping, as in what are we doing with the knowledge that we brought, and deep integrity. If we're going to walk a talk, if we're going to say we were working with something, we bloody well need to do it responsibly. And just the huge thing, which I sit on some panels on, is ethics and duty of care and codes of conduct, as we transfer some concepts of shamanism, because even some psychotherapeutic modalities are very similar, working with the imaginal realm, working with archetypes, etc., etc. But we have this Western world that wants to colonize everything with pieces of paper and people suing each other and territorial stuff about practice and boundaries and things like that. And a lot of that keeps people safe, and Western diseases are different. And we have a different way of the psyche develops in a slightly different way. We have different, when they've done, for instance, research on visions that people see, and I did some research like this as well, but mine was psychospiritual thematics. You know, people find people do see serpents and jaguars. You know, we're working with a medicine that comes from a place which has serpents and jaguars. They're also profound archetypes that represent many things. But when they've looked at people from indigenous communities and what they see when they take medicines like ayahuasca, it's all very relevant to the way they work and the way they decode their ecosystem and what they see. So when people have done studies on that, then some of the studies are slightly redundant to 9 to 5 working in an office, you know, as a clerical assistant. So yeah, so what's happened is that now there's this global shamanic resurgence, and people are coming to these medicines and these practices. And as we know, there's lots of brandy guru stuff. There's lots of people who haven't done 40 years of apprenticeship, and they've done it over a weekend, and they think they're God. And there are people getting hurt. And I've just been given even, you know, another horrible story that happened with the wood just in Mexico, just about 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, where somebody left their body, who was a drug user, who went off halfway through the wood session to take something, and they didn't come back. And the practitioner's very young, is trained, has a Gabonese wife, but, you know, he's young, and I think he was a bit gung-ho, but nobody wishes anything like this on him. And with that sort of situation, when we have that in the Western world, then all the red tape needs to come out. People want the red tape to come out. And this is actually, in my standpoint, I'm trying to get back to how do we create communities and tribes to deal with the sicknesses in the community. And for me, red tape and paper is not sovereign. It's a patriarchal format, but it keeps some people feeling they're safe. And it actually protects some people from persecution and prosecution at certain times. So at the current time, we have a lot of discussions about regulation of shamanic practices and insurance and things like that. And it's a minefield. I personally have my own feelings about this, but well, I'm going to share them. My own feelings are, if we work from the microcosm and from the community out, we won't need that regulation. It's when people are not cohesive and not communicating, and they're treating it like too much of a job and not a sacred act, then that's when the red tape and the things come in. And yes, when we do certain things like long retreats, we do need to make sure we know where everybody's up to. And it's always important that we assess how a person is and look at their mental health and go through continuous assessment, so that at any one given point, we as a practitioner can say, I'm sorry, you're not ready for this right now. Okay, and the slightest glimmer of weirdness that we signal. But the pieces of paper thing, we've even had validated by barristers, is kind of a bit of a silly thing right now, and considering some of the legal situations in certain countries about certain things. So we have all these difficulties with the transferring of something that's an indigenous, community-based thing, where just like there's a cosmic postman, there's a cosmic shaman, except they're not cosmic, but because we don't have the tribal system anymore, that's where things got confused, because nobody knows who they are or what they do. And that is why people now want to throw a piece of paper rather aggressively at each other, or protect themselves with pieces of paper. And maybe the pen is mightier than the sword, but that's the also thing, that the sword, that he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. For me, we who live by the heart die by the spirit portal way, and we go into the absolute. So for me, it's intrinsic that we get our communications, we get our tribe, we get our guilds back, so that when we're communicating effectively, we do a lot of referrals word of mouth, it works. And for me, that seems to work. So I just want you to be aware of some of these situations at the moment. Now, let's get on. Oh, the screen's on the thing again. Bear with me. Got one. Oh, look at that. Okay, we can get another. Okay. So I wanted to talk quickly about some modern day case studies. And I mentioned techno-shamanism, and techno-shamanism was coined by Mark Healy, who does a lot of great work. It's become a more known phrase. I work with Brazilian techno-shamans. They're more hackers, and even the word hacking, lots of people think that's an evil word, and hacking was first used as a word. It was when a person was working with a model train set, and they made like a new little thing, like I think it was a new little carriage or something like this, and they upgraded what was existing by this novel little upgrade, and that made the whole little train set work better. And then that was the first coining of the word hacker. And a hacker is actually somebody who appropriates some knowledge to enhance something else, rather than, and then that word has been hacked to mean people who take people's bank account details and blah, blah, blah. But, you know, at the end of the day, they're probably using it better than the banks are. So, you know, when we get the money back usually. So, so techno-shamanism comes in different formats. I'm going to look today at the techno-shaman hacker movement and the techno-shaman movement that I was part of, which was the ThreeParty Movement. And I'm going to look at sort of techno and trance music, and just explain why what we were doing was modern day shamanism in some ways, or that's why that transmission came through to me in those states. So yeah, you know, we have these little bullet points that just talk about modern psychotherapy, raving. You know, it can be utilizing things like psilocybin or LSD for depression and doing it in a semi-ritualistic purpose or context. There are a lot of people working with things like DMT and taking it as a ritual, which is good because it's a part synthetic, part natural medicine, and it needs to be treated with care. And yeah, the techno-shamanic, the second one, is basically saying that even though there may be an employing of technology and sort of modern tools, that the context still actually bring us back to a similar vantage point or understanding as shamanic perspectives would about liminal positions, being on the outside, about ritualistic settings, about working with a new language or a language that makes us understand something about the ecosystem or nature and brings us back into synergy with our environment. Because at the end of the day, the hackers that we work with, they're all recycling computers and working. There's some hackers that I was working with in Brazil who did a talk at the first Technoshamanism gathering on satellite astrology. So they were saying, look, so we have asteroids and people have the goddess astrology, we have the planets and we have the astrology there. What if there's like, because now we've got all these satellites in the orbit, what if there's like a SmithKline Beecham star, you know, satellite, and what would we be born under the superdrug satellite, you know, whatever. So, you know, people positing and looking at the relation between even technology and the environment. And this is a really big issue now with AI. And some people have developed a new blockchain concept called the holochain, which is using biomimicry because they're really concerned about the corrupt use of AI and AI taking over. And they actually saw this when they were doing a dieta moral, the flying tree medicine from Peru, and they saw that we have to set up biomimicry AI to regulate AI, and I totally honor them. And they're working with a bee technology, so it's called Hum Earth, HUMM.Earth is their platform. It's just new. So yes, on to this. Let's see, can we get here? I see he's doing the thing again, so you We've got so many slides all over the place. Sorry, I'm gonna have to do this. It's so annoying. Okay, then I have to go up, and then right, we can do up. Up we can do. Okay, Techno-Shaman Hacker Movement. Okay, so there's a really amazing book if you want to know more about well, Techno-Shamanism. He calls it technosis, as in noetic states. So Eric Davis wrote this book called Technosis, which is like a hacker's dream dribbling Bible thing. They love it. And he just looks at this land and these languages of technology and a spirituality that comes from things like source coding, and the hackers, you know, working. A lot of them get really stoned when they're working, and they think really outside of the box. You know, they hack things. They don't look in a lateral sort of way at problem solving. And Eric Davis looks at this whole way of sort of technosis, of working with technology and gnosis and fusing the two. And you know, it's very interesting that it's technology that now helps us to talk to other people about how we acquire cosmic knowledge. We have downloads and upgrades, you know, and so there is something about the way that technology is working that some people are harnessing into to cut and paste novel things from one into another to help communities. And these people, like hackers, are kind of stoned, often eccentric dudes at the edge of their society. And I used to, you know, I set up a hub in Manchester, which was a holistic hub, and it was tuned in with lots of networks around the world, and based on things that they'd done. And they were always working at the liminal points of society. And for instance, some of the hacker movements I was working with were letting children use recycled computers when they're in the Amazon. We used to work with them right in the middle of the Amazon near Santarém in Brazil. And they would have their computers that they could use, and all the kids in Brazil all want to be online. They don't have money for their own computer, so they have so many cyber cafes and kids just in there all day long gaming and using their version of Facebook and stuff like that. And they had this brilliant solution for how to make the whole thing work. So because we were always looking at peer-to-peer concepts, which is teaching each other, and I developed a peer-to-peer concept for the hub we were in, which people loved around work, which I will tell you about in a minute. Yeah, so the kids in the Amazon, when they collected a plastic bottle and filled it with rubbish, like crisp packets and stuff, they'd get a free hour on the computer. So it's helping them to recycle, it's helping them to have bricks to build eco-houses, and then the kids were getting connectivity from that. So that was real techno-shamanism, because it's helping the community to be more cohesive. It was actually solving local problems, okay? And I developed a course where all the teaching was peer-to-peer. We used to have like Jamaican grannies who in their 80s come in, and once people learned one module, they taught it to another adult learner. And when they did the whole 10 modules, they got a free recycled computer to take home, and that was regarded as like a global pioneering project, which was all about getting the community back together by getting them interacting. Okay, so that was probably slightly techno-shamanic. Okay. I'm just gonna have to go through these in whatever order. Sorry guys, it's been boring. Okay, so I'm gonna tell you, like, I'm calling them similarities. You're gonna see why they're similarities when we get to some of the next slides. So these are similarities that link with mainstream shamanism, and they were also things that I found unite some of the techno-shamanic movements, like the ThreeParty Movement, okay? So there's always some sort of DIY ritual. So I used to go to these hacker fests and just, you know, there were all these geeks making these little things. It was a total ritual. And in free parties, you know, we would put on these ceremonies, these big parties, you know, everybody come together in their consciousness and create these places with no leader, no money, you know, just maybe make it, and it would be a ritual. And we would go into certain trance states, and there'd be certain days where we would know certain things would come through, and the healing and the upgrading of the consciousness there. And hopefully we're going to be able to get to work with some of that at Boomtown Fair. I've been invited to be part of a new consciousness shift at Boomtown, which is like the biggest, most messy festival in the UK, and also as people who we started ThreeParty Movement with. So I did a talk recently, and then we were talking about how we're going to upgrade the consciousness. Yeah, we're now looking at having a space there and at Glastonbury. So these DIY rituals used to be where I could see how consciousness was upgrading and how people were cutting and pasting their mind states with each other. And that's been forgotten about since the ThreeParty scene got kind of outlawed after the Criminal Justice Act in 1994, which meant that a lot of my brothers and sisters had to leave the UK with their sound systems. So we're gonna see how these rituals can come back. And it's just like, when we do a retreat, we know there's a point where like, oh God, everybody hates us. They're all having meltdowns, and it's necessary. So they're like the shadow points in a ritual. And then there's the point where we get everybody back in their body and get them dancing. And a lot of these things were, when I started doing retreats, there were things I'd seen for years, like, oh, they're here. And that's why sometimes when I think things look like this right mess, I was like, no, it's fine. It's just that point. It's that point. I've seen it all. See it all with loads of people with blood all over them, falling off buildings. It's okay. We're going to get there. It's okay. So yes, the ritual is hugely important. And the temporary autonomous zone, the TAZ, that's also super important. So that's also when we consecrate a space, whether it be for a party or a hacker movement event or for a retreat, it's a temporary autonomous zone. So it becomes in its own temple for a while. There's quite a lot of writing on temporary autonomous zones, but this is where my conscious life began when I was 14, 15. So the temporary autonomous zone is great because it's really where festival consciousness and culture, and that's why Britain is such a strong country for that, because we've got such a huge festival scene. We've got Glastonbury, so we're kind of leading in many ways, especially in terms of innovation with the global festival front and these temporary autonomous zones. But what's happened is the consciousness is pretty flat, and they're not up to date with the festival organisers. Haven't really been up to date with the consciousness shift, and that's now where we've got a bridge in with them. And we've been working with several other people with festivals like Burning Man. We did stuff at Boom. So now what's happening is there's a really interesting gateway time where we're talking to these festival organisers, where we're trying to say, yeah, we understand temporary autonomous zone, we understand this, we come from the movement, we also work with shamanism, we work with wisdom keepers. How can we upgrade the temporary autonomous zone to be in line with the need to do ecosystemic alignment? And Boomtown they've got an amazing thing for next year, where they've been working with these dystopic visions for cities, and then this year they're like, guess what the new message is? In fact, I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to put the show reel up for you on our resources, so you can see what I've been invited to do, and I may be able to bring some of us in as a crew. I'm going to say, look, I've got a consciousness team. Can we try to do something? So bear with me. Okay, back to number 3, moving beyond the material. Again, just like in shamanism, we're working within an imaginal realm. In Technoshamanism, it's a real anarchic framework. People are not working to make lots of money out of recycled computers. They're working to reduce landfill. They're working to reduce the amount of genocides there are in civil wars through mining coltan and other precious minerals and metals that have a very short shelf life in this galactic window. So and festivals, often we have our tokens, we don't use money, and we create these installations. And yes, there are in the commercial festivals loads of money, but the free parties were very much like no system. In fact, there's a book called No System by a girl called Gatekeeping Peterson, who is the same age as us, which charts the ThreeParty movement. I think she's just written a sequel to it as well. There's also this encoding and decoding. This is super important. One of the discussions with the techno shamans was we were working with open source culture, which is the opposite of copyright. We were copyleft, but actually just full open source stuff. So it's knowledge for everybody rather than knowledge is power for an elite. Okay. And I used to have a bit of a debate with some of the Brazilians about this because they would be like, everything for everybody. And I'm like, no, 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 you cannot give the toddler the keys to the spaceship. They don't know how to drive the spaceship. And what I could see from my years of kind of spiritual awakening was just, you know, just how huge things can be when we explode, and that it's sometimes not safe. And this is just like a duty of care with somebody with a psychospiritual emergence. We don't give the keys. If there's a rite of passage, and this goes back to real shamanism, is rites of passage when people are ready to receive certain bits of information. And yes, they say that the truth portal opened on 11/11/2010, and if you look at that, WikiLeaks really came up and stuff. But really important that we sometimes have special language that's for the initiates. So in Australia, there's dot work, as you know, and there's certain dot work that only the initiates can read, okay? And it has codes in it, and the normal people just see what they see, okay? And this is something that we have to learn as gatekeepers, is where's the rite of passage for this person? Are they ready for this knowledge? And sometimes we have to censor and encode language. And you may see sometimes I have to go, so I have to glitch on that, because in certain rites of passage in certain communities, I've been told I can't share something, or for somebody's protection, I can't name certain groups, or for whatever. Sometimes I'm having to be like navigating what I can say and what I can't say, because I have a duty of care and a responsibility to those who've shared knowledge with me to keep everybody safe. And this is one of the biggest things, but most overlooked, is our responsibility of when we share certain information, certain medicines, certain things. It's just like, that's why there are ages of consent with different things. And that's why certain festivals have a kids area, and they're not supposed to be the main thoroughfare, because, you know, a psychospiritual emergence through a shamanic practice or through a festival, which can be a shamanic practice, is just as huge, and people can pop and not come back, okay? In order number 4, there's also this group mind. And with the hacker movement, we were part of a big network called Bricolabs, and we had people in many, many different countries. And I was one of the physical bridges who used to go and visit different people and weave things up, because I was mapping loads of this stuff. And we had like a group mind in many ways. So if one person in Pakistan would say, look, can anybody advise me on something? Somebody in Indonesia would go, yeah, or Switzerland. And we were working very much with decentralized information and distributed networks, which is going to be useful when we bring in these new systems that we're talking about. Because, and this is why people like blockchain and things like that as decentralized financial and technological systems, because this is a way that things, and this is back to the old shamanic way, lots of small villages making the global village rather than London and Washington and Rome, you know? So, and, you know, in the ThreeParty movement, we were working telepathically, as I mentioned before. Sometimes we would just not see people for 2 years and we'd end up parked beside them. And it's total synchronicity, because we were all coming there with no leader. We were coming there for the party and for the immersion. And, you know, people thought, and people were going into altered states, and we would start to go into the group mind and know our place and fall into that. It was amazing. And so I mentioned appropriation and hacking earlier, so we went with that. I mentioned also these people at the outskirts of society, the ThreeParty Movement. As I mentioned, you know, 1994 people had to leave the UK, which has been where the whole thing was seeded with things like Castle Morton. And we had people like Beacon in the streets, and we had lots of key waves, and the Battle of Beanfields and things like that. But, you know, people got outlawed. And always the three parties, you know, we're always in industrial estates or outside the city because we weren't allowed to do them in the city, or if we did, it was an industrial estate at the edge, at the outskirts. And yeah, you know, it's really exactly the same thing as where the shaman is sitting, the hut, a bit further out from the main bed. Okay. Again, it's non-entropic, it's the energy would keep going. It was about sustaining life of things, about energy, but continuation, rather than you get something, you buy a new thing, it stops, it dies. This whole thing that we've got with the, you know, like Apple Mac products and bullshit Western stuff where things are designed to break, so you have to go and buy a new one. And that's like people are designed to break, so you buy them pills and then they die and you get a new one, rather than actually we can make these novel hacks and sustain everything. We just like when we can sustain our consciousness through our death process as we go through the bardo, you know. So yeah, this thing of we would make something out of nothing and then make something else. Well, or not out of nothing, but we were able to alchemize and always create something better out of coupling things together. And that is, the material world is very much about, oh no, you're not cool unless you've got the newest model, which is really dodgy. So you get, again, the shaman has to use what tools they've got. You know, some of the tools for me as a healing facilitator, when I've forgotten my suitcase or it's not turned up and I've got no tools, that's when I have to get big downloads because I got no tools today. Okay, what's my tool? And it's this thing about having to be resilient and starting our landscape. And the rave movement, the hacker movement, and the shamanic movement, you know, it's like sometimes we don't have the plan and we're like, oh, different plants started talking to me, you know. It's we'll get a hack on this plant wants to be with this plant, and that's going to make something a little bit similar to that plant. This is, you know, this is the way it works. So as the little bit on the side says, Technoshamanism originates in a waste bin excess, leftovers, remains, noises, and discontinuous processes, and how it recycles materials. Okay, so it's really important. And one of my dear sisters, Fabi Borges, said, Technoshamanism is dirty because its origin is the human's material and subjective garbage dumps, which again is like the shaman going into the unconscious, going into the lower realms. And Technoshamanism, you know, it was dirty warehouses, you know, I keep talking about people falling off buildings and stuff. And again, hackers, lots of these waste heaps, these e-waste heaps with cables everywhere. And, you know, it's going into these uninhabitable zones. And I'm finding essence and an elixir from that. This, I did have a little tune, but there's people kind of quiet here. And yeah, there's a tune called Forward the Revolution that I played, but it takes up so much, I probably crashed the computer because of the way it is on this presentation. So I just mentioned Spiral Tribe, who were some of the vanguards who worked with my brothers and sisters in Desert Storm. Desert Storm went off to Kosovo and played techno in the middle of the desert in the middle of the war, and all sorts of stuff. Brilliant people. And yeah, you know, we were united in many ways with the number 23, and I was telling you about divination and things and how we used to see 23s everywhere. And it's really funny, this little being that you see on this Spiral Tribe picture, I saw a being like that once when I was in a medicine ceremony, but it was more tribal. It looked like a joker. And then there's only a few years later that I realized it's Shokapili, the plant medicine Aztec god. And yeah, anyway, he looked a bit like that. So, you know, there were all these, yeah, it's just really interesting because they weren't aware that we were doing something shamanic, and I was having all these epiphanies at the time. Yeah, now one of the things with the three parties now is a lot of people are just in a hedonistic state and just self-medicating, and it's quite carnage, it's quite dark at times. It's still brilliant because it's a different system and it's for people on the edge and people explore something different. But what's happened, what I've been trying to talk to the movement about, is that they haven't had, because there was a lot of trauma, there was a lot of violence, and then people have moved on, had kids, it was such a big thing, people were just like, oof, and then they go into a slightly more normal life. And we just recently talked a little bit about, was the trauma, because what I've noticed is the young ones don't know the history of the movement. And the oral tradition has been lost, so now the young people don't know why they are going into altered states. And as such, they don't know how to navigate into them. So this is some of the work that we're going to be doing this summer, coming up next summer, is working to, I hope, assist this consciousness raising, contextualizing why we did it. That's not going to say that people do it for the same reason now. They do need to know so that the thread can be connected, because there's gaps in the thread. So yes, we're in an interesting time now, just over 23 years since a lot of those people left. I know, the family people. Okay, I'm doing the thing. Okay, I've had this one, see. Annoying. Okay, can we get another one? So what happens at these events is also very shamanic-y. And I'm sure many of you have been to a festival or a party where you've suddenly had an ecstatic experience. And many people at festivals have psychospiritual emergencies. There's quite a lot on psychospiritual emergencies. I call them emergencies rather than emergencies, because I feel that the biggest problem is actually people demonizing the situation and making it into a negative thing when it's actually an awakening. But it can be very, very extreme for people. It's a Kundalini awakening, or people can suddenly feel connected or start to hear voices, or they can have spiritual interference, because especially people haven't been working their offerings in the land. So so there's a lot in the growth work about Kundalini awakenings, but it can be huge headaches, huge third eye explosions, heart palpitations, ringing in the ears, wobbling, lots of kriya, being psychotic, etc., etc. So psychosis is something that we have to deal with, or understand without demonizing, which is often a bleed through of different realms. Actually, antipsychotics, if given in the right situation, it can be very quick acting. The person doesn't need to be hospitalized, but there are ways that we can work with psychotic people and psychotic episodes as well, if that happens at an activity. So, and there are now bigger care teams at festivals, because as the consciousness shift increases, there's going to be more and more people having these things. And having healing crises as they get into a tribal scenario, suddenly their higher self and their multidimensional self aligns, and suddenly boom, yeah. So I had a big Kundalini awakening in Czech Republic one time, and it was pretty much like to deal with it on my own. It wasn't. Luckily, I was pretty ecstatic. I was like, I don't know shit about anything. I had like one little horrible thing, and I wasn't like, people were like, what's wrong with you? And I was just like, for days. I was just lying like this. And I could tell, I could just start to understand extraterrestrial energies, and all sorts of stuff. It was very interesting. I think that was in like, I don't know, 1999. Needs to be dealt with caution, because it can last a long time for people, and when dealt with badly, it will be more horrific and scary for a person. People are usually very hypersensitive. They're sensitive to loud noises or certain things in people, bright lights. So often they need to be taken to a calm space and place and just dealt with understanding, but not too much talky, but also try to keep them safe so they don't damage anything with themselves or others. And just looking at this as well. So it's just about not getting too overloaded. There's also this thing about also festivals, that there are an increasing amount of people with spirit interference, and people aren't aware of that. So that's why some of us use hape or tobacco when we're in festival environments, just because there's a lot of energy and people carrying a lot of energy, and because people can be wide open. They're course, they're wide open, so they can be intercepted by things, and that can be a bit tricky sometimes. So those of us who are now in a process of purification have to keep our energy bodies quite clear, because there could be a lot going on. So a lot of us can't really cope with the dance floor energy the way we used to when we were going through our initiations into those realms, unless we have some tobacco or something around us. Yeah, I did have some clips. If you can watch this film, it's really cool. Electronic Awakening. I can't remember his name. I was talking to him, and he gave us the mission to. Oh, I'm going to make this. Let's see if I can play the link. That'd be nice. Sorry, but the volume is up there.
Since the beginning of time, mankind has used music and dance to commune with nature and the spirit of the universe.
Well, the ancient goddess rituals and traditions and earth-based spirituality in general has always been about ecstatic religious experience.
It's like these principles, these fundamental principles of divine realization, of truth, of God, of religion, were just kind of nonchalantly oozing out of everybody who's going into these dance parties and experiencing communion with each other through music.
We are looking at a machine called an electronic sound synthesizer.
I don't mind telling you about waves.
There's these incredible lighting systems and sounds resonating the walls and the floor.
Something snapped, and all of a sudden I was addicted, and it totally changed my whole life.
It moved me to a point where there was no turning back. I was moving forward with the sound.
So we've linked into a deeper, more ancient understanding of what dance and the intention that we hold with each other is all about.
You can't really talk about dance without also talking about music and rhythm.
Sound is the basis of form and shape.
You know, there's a practice of what would be called shamanic journey, where you use a drum and a rattle, which would be thought to be a theta wave in the brain entrainment process.
The whole thing was generated by a feeling of community and togetherness that existed in that space when it was created. So that was something really to believe in.
It's like this neo-techno-tribal shamanism is really what it is, and but it's modern with all the technology and the nature and the lights and the sounds and the movement. It's the alchemy of all of those elements coming together to create this synergy, like finding while we're here in our bodies an ability to just self-express freely without ego.
In a way, it really doesn't matter what their cosmology is. It doesn't really matter what their belief system is. They're connected regardless of that.
We call it redefining the ancient tribal ritual for the 21st century.
There you go. So that's a little bit. You can watch the film. It's pretty cool. It's on. I'll be actually. Somebody reminds me about that. So the trance scene developed in Goa primarily, and then there's a really big. I mean, it's all over the world now, but the West Coast, California as well, really had very big kind of free parties that were very similar to the techno parties that were happening in Europe. And the developments that happened, the timelines are slightly similar. The Goa party started before the European techno parties. What was really interesting was in 1989 there was the Summer of Love, and there was the ecstasy hit England, and you had like business people and black and white people all dancing in ecstasy. And that was when the acid house scene started, and that's where the ThreeParty Movement was really taking off. And so Goa, I think the trance scene started a bit before because it was linked with the drums, and then the electronic music started to come in. But regarding a system and a no system and a movement, in many ways the European ThreeParty scene crystallized in a bigger way first, and then the trance scene was kind of like a sister over in the States. So I don't know if it's because I have more sun and less drugs. There is more academic work on the trance scene that talks about techno-shamanism or shamanism and the party. Or being more coherent, I don't know. But yeah, it's yeah, whereas you can look some stuff up. In fact, it's all on another computer, but I'll maybe we'll find some papers sometime. It reminds me. And when I'm back, yeah. So if you watch Electronic Awakening, there are loads of great people on there who really discuss, you know, why also going into the wilderness is like, because in transpersonal ecopsychology, wilderness studies is really key. And you know, that's why when we used to take young people out into the wilderness, like the biggest transformations. That's why so many of us went to retreat centers in nature. And when we went to free parties out in nature, it was therapy. You know, it was just amazing. Nature was, and the people in the States, they're more conscious about why that was good for them. And as such, to this day, the trance scene there is still going strong, and there's some great. They have a more mindful policy. You know, there's people like, you know, there's no litter. There's more spirituality about why they're playing the music, and people have kind of slightly spiritual sets, etc., etc. The techno scene is more kind of like going into the void in some ways. But there's a group, like some of the Spiral Tribe crews started a thing. I've got it because apparently they're not doing it still, but they just did it a couple of times, a thing called Dharma Techno. And they were basically doing an equivalent of a Vipassana, that I think was for like 7 days, 6 or 7 days. And then the 7th day, this guy used to play these amazing live sets, but then play like a techno set, and his sets were amazing. They would just take people to another level. And people filmed what happened after that. They did the Vipassana and did this techno thing, and it was just looked amazing. But I nearly went, but I was just like, I want techno every night. Because for me, the techno is just to meditate, to switch off, because it depends on our frequency, our vibration. But that sort of fast music actually switches me into a Zen place. So, and different people react to different music in different ways. And that links on to this tribe consciousness, the Theta states. And this is similar to the drum beat and the shamanic journeying, you know, that happens. And that's why we used to see like these miracles happening and things, this wave, working with these waves. But most people weren't conscious of the magic we were doing, because we were going into the same rhythm as the drum would take us. So yes, it's super. And when we're in a theta state, we are closer to oneness, to source, and we're also closer to programming things that we can manifest in our lives. So in a meditative state or normal, coherent 3D theta sort of state, we can pray, we can write stuff. But once we go up to theta, that's where we really can cause bigger change. So think of the power if we all actually mindfully, and this is what I was positing in this talk when I give it a boom, think about what we can do if we all go in mindfully to the dance floor. And this is what I want to explore at the festivals coming up, is let's have some homework, let's do stuff with them, with that state, because that's what people used to do when they did a rain dance. What people used to do, it's what we're doing, man. So yeah, so anyway, there you go. I'm going to link this to this one. So if we're going to go into theta state, then this is kind of how we work with our consciousness, is that, and I'm not going to go too much into this because we're going to be doing more consciousness studies, but basically the earthosphere is basically, it's kind of like the cloud of all of everything. It's a little bit like the Akashic Records, but the Akashic Records is more linked to karma and like past lives and karmic stories. Whereas the ethosphere is kind of where everything is sitting as data in there that we thought or created. So we have these places we can tune into when we're together, okay? And it's linked to the imaginal realm. And then the noosphere is, some people say it is like a coating around the earth, and it actually links up to the earth. And so when we work mindfully, we can connect to the noosphere because we vibrate at the same frequency as the earth, the human frequency. So when we line our consciousness up with the noosphere, we can actually create planetary consciousness shifts, okay? And this is more and more what we need to do, is go into big groups of people, go into theta states, and go into these shamanic, techno-shamanic states and play with the noosphere. And that's what some of us do with Galactic Mind Calendar and things. And we, you know, this is the sort of thing we do when we're in good ceremonies. And this links through to morphic resonance, the consciousness that is of all things. And, you know, the Aborigines and everything know that stones have consciousness, trees, consciousness, we have different languages for different ones. And some of us in our gene keys hold a vibration, which means that we can tune into that. So the more and more we're aware of that, we can just be like, oh yeah, so I'm going to get the story from this place, or what I need to do, I'm going to get that code. So I've gone sometimes to places where the Mamos were, just been told to go there because I wanted to learn more about how they do stuff, and I've just asked to plug into the field, and then I've been guided as to what sort of things to pick up and how to work with them. So that data is in everything. And interestingly, in technology, they want to work with RFID technology, where they want to put like the story and everything, like this was made in Korea by this little lady on assembly line, and it does this, but it's all actually there already, and we in our consciousness can actually tune into it. And when we go into these altered states, we can find more of the language to bring that in. And this goes straight back to what Patrick's talking about, the different layers of consciousness and the communication languages. So as we become more and more sensitive to all of this, we start to be able to realize our personal fortes, with which dimensions and realms are ours, because different people have different fortes. And then we can work out as a tribe more and more about how we bring things back and how we communicate with those, and how we actually create consciousness shifts as well with the field and as groups harmoniously. So we used to have quite a lot of miraculous situations would happen. There's one time in Czech Republic, the riot police, the army came in. It was pretty full on. Czech Tech had been this huge technoval that people used to come to for many years, and it was getting big. And then the police came in, and we were like, we got into our car just as they were coming to batter us. Anyway, at first the police tried to tear gas people at one dance floor, and everybody was just dancing. Oh, lovely, really lovely people. And because they connected with the noosphere and the ecosystem, there was no wind. This ghost of wind just blew it back at the police. And they all danced and did a bit of this, which was a bit naughty. But they're like, you should have seen what happened. They tried to tear gas us, but it didn't work. This gust of wind came. There was no wind. And then they came in like the next day, and they attacked a lot of people. We got away just in time. And yeah. Anyway, the interesting thing was then it was on the front page of all the news in the Czech Republic, and the riot police looked like Darth Vaders, and there were all these lovely, beautiful people all wearing colours, and little children all looking like they've been demonized. And then the people of the Czech Republic said, we fought for our people, for community in the Velvet Revolution. These people are not doing any harm to anybody. They took it to the Supreme Court, and Czech Tech won. And then it became legalized, and actually it lost its edge. But it became a victory for the ThreeParty Movement in Europe. So yeah, so we used to see miraculous things when we were aligning with our ecosystem, and that, you know, it was to support us, okay, because we were all doing good. We were people living by the land, and that's, I guess, why it's really important that people get educated, go to things like Glasgow, because it's carnage. They're not living by the land, and when people don't make the offerings and things like that, that's when stuff can get messy, and there could be more psychospiritual emergencies of the dark variety. Not that dark's bad, but it can lead to people leaving their bodies and committing suicide and stuff, and I've had to deal with that sort of thing in the last year or two. So yeah, So yeah, lots of things, lots of things. I'm just gonna leave lots of this because this was for the room people, and let's do this annoying thing again, because it was just really about pagamentos and Aini and dispatcher, because you all know about those. And again, it's just about us giving payments, earth payments, talking to the land before we do any of these techno-shamanic or shamanic activities, and building up a relation. Because sometimes the spirits and the landscape doesn't really like the music, they need to be told. It's really important that we check in and get permission from the ancestors to use certain places. Some of the Karo people that I work with are really, really upset because they have Inti, which is their solstice celebrations every year. And then these people come to this transfer from the Sacred Valley, and they're like, it's seriously, it's an inflation, it's big. So I haven't checked with the ancestors, I haven't checked with us. So this is why there's a lot of important work needs to be done. And that's why we went and gave payments and started to talk to the London Assembly in early September, so that we could start to say, look, there's going to be stuff. Obviously, it knows the festival happens, but like we're asking permission to work with the ecosystem to do this consciousness work. And there's a series of ongoing works there with some of the priestesses there to make sure that we're really griding up with the land, not against it, so that what happens for everybody means that everybody's held in the ecosystem and that we can truly be united once more. So lovelies, I think there was another one that's gone out of order. Yeah, oh, but here we go. This is just all to bring to space holding session. So let's go, because this is going to be really important for us preparing for Mexico and for Australian gatherings. So please take this forward, and it's like, have you ever observed or experienced a psychospiritual emergence? And would you like to share more about it or ask some questions about them? And what would you like to know about spirit interference and step up your practice? And yeah, you know, again, I've got to do the spaceship toddler thing, but I will be able, and I spelled interference wrong, sorry, but I will be able to share some stuff. And yeah, it is important that we talk about this for Mexico. Okay, lovelies. So really nice to connect sort of with you or talk at you, but knowing that you're there and you're going to hear this sometime. Hope you enjoyed that, and speak to you soon.